Hi, I'm Larry Castle here with Ken Brown for episode 93 of That's a Good Question. Part 2 of Can John Durham, Michael Flynn, and Robert Mueller help me grow as a Christian? Welcome back. Today is a second episode, and we're devoting this to helping us develop better discernment. And we've been using an illustration or a couple of illustrations from political and legal realms starting last week. And it's because we see a connection between those and Christian character and growth. And that's the reason we talk about these issues. You know, this isn't just two pastors who really enjoy talking about politics. This is one who enjoys talking about politics and the other one enduring it because we agree that it's important. So it really is two pastors concerned for the well-being of God's people. And this onslaught of misinformation that we've experienced and taken in, and all of the ill effects that this has, not the least of which is on our credibility with the world that we're trying to reach, and also the distraction that it becomes for those who get pulled into the conspiracies, who become fearful of what's going to happen. So let's remind our listeners, our viewers, why we're using these three, Durham, Flynn, and Mueller, as examples of how misinformation has adversely affected really good people.
Well, we're using those three really for two reasons. They're all related investigations into the Trump campaign's many ties to Russians and the Russian government, beginning from at least the first half of 2016. So that's the first. They're related that way. Second, these are all issues, cases that can be empirically verified. You know, one of the sad consequences of the information overload that we're swamped with is that people have a more difficult time distinguishing truth from error, fact from opinion. One of the things we try to do on this podcast is to distinguish claims that have been proven from inferences that we might draw from various facts. So I'll sometimes say, I can't prove this, but I believe it to be the case. That such and such.
Pointing out that there's nothing wrong with thinking through things and possibilities, but that's different than claiming that it's fact.
Exactly. But and that's in keeping with the Bible's very high standard of proof for any truth claims that we make. You know, documentation is required, 2 or 3 witnesses, the Bible says. Legal issues then are a good place to illustrate truth from error because they have we really have literally no institution of human origin that more thoroughly and robustly examines facts and demands proof than our legal system. And we ought to be very thankful for our legal system. And our legal system is under great stress today because you have had politicians talking about judges as being Obama judges and Clinton judges and Trump judges and all of that. None of that's helpful. In fact, it undermines the credibility of our legal system. We shouldn't cheer that on, friends, when politicians do that. We had a retired judge in Wisconsin this week assassinated.
I didn't know that.
Assassinated.
Wow.
And just within the last 2 days, Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh was stalked by a guy at 1 a.m. in his neighborhood who came from California, from the other side of the country, and he stated that he was there to kill Brett Kavanaugh. So this is unprecedented in my lifetime, the way that justices and the legal system are being attacked, and Christians of all people should not cheer that on. So Durham and Flynn and Mueller were all involved extensively in court proceedings, and we have the documents so that there's no dispute about what happened with all three of them.
You're saying no dispute, but people you just turn on your television, you got diametrically opposed views of what happened with all three of those. So how are we saying there's no dispute?
That's true. You're right. I should have said there's no question about what happened in all three of these cases. But it's true. People can dispute whatever they want. And indeed they do, as you said. So we have people disputing things about which, in fact, there is no question.
Well, what then is the reason? What causes people to dispute something that's so easily proved or disproved?
It's their sources of information. People talk about things and get exercised over things about which they've not gone to original sources.
Okay.
Instead, they're getting someone's retread of the original sources, often from people who themselves have not actually looked at the original court documents or the reports. Now, it's true that people come to a podcast like this wanting us to distill what we've read into explanations, into conclusions, and they do so because, at least for most listeners, they've learned to trust thoroughness as we reference and often quote the original sources. But if nothing else, we at least point folks to those to verify what it is we've claimed.
Yeah, and this is becoming a bigger problem in our day because the choice of sources to trust, not because we're going to, or I should say, it's not because the variety of news sources that are available, but it's because when we go to sources, we don't just look for information most times. We're looking for which of these sources is on my team.
That's the problem.
And some of them even label themselves as fair and balanced, and that's how we know they're our team.
Right.
But we're still looking for our tribe.
Yes.
And that really means we're looking for somebody who's going to really give it to the other side.
Exactly. So for the conservative, political, and cultural and religious environment that we inhabit and we believe in, unfortunately, there are news sources that tell us what we want to hear. And so too many of us go to them alone because before we're done today, in fact, I think it would be a good idea for us to make some recommendations for folks to diversify our information intake. But as an example of the so-called news, a so-called news outlet telling people what they want to hear, not necessarily what's newsworthy or what's important for their own lives. Just 2 days ago, we had the first of 6 upcoming hearings on the investigation into what happened with the January 6, 2021 riot at our Capitol. Now, all 3 broadcast networks and most cable news networks covered it in prime time from 8 until 10 on Thursday evening of this past week. Now, if you missed it, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you watch it and that you keep up with the next 5 that are going to take place in the next few weeks. All of them except one during the day. The next one is coming up on Monday the 13th at 10 a.m. And only the last one is going to be another evening broadcast. Now, if you didn't see it this past Thursday, though, it's probably because you were either watching nothing or because at 8 o'clock every single night you turn on the same thing. Tucker Carlson, followed by Sean Hannity, then Laura Ingraham on Fox.
So they didn't play it?
They didn't play it. They're the only ones who didn't play it. ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, C-SPAN, not Fox News.
That is curious.
They moved it to the Fox Business channel.
Okay.
So they did, I should say, they did carry it there.
They did carry it, just
but
not
Brett Baer,
not on their news channel.
not on their news channel.
Interesting.
Fox decided not to carry this historically important event on their main channel. And as I think about it, they almost had to skip it, at least on their primary channel. As I say, they relegated it to their business channel because their very own hosts are actually part of the Capitol riot debacle. There was such a symbiotic relationship between the Trump White House and Fox News, I keep putting that in quotes, that Hannity and Ingraham, for example, had the White House staff and the president himself on speed dial. And on January 6th, we have the texts. But if you didn't hear any of this, then you may not know about it. And if you only watch Fox News, I guarantee you don't know that we have the texts. They've been published because the January 6th committee has subpoenaed those texts.
I mean, there's a part of me that says, if you grew up in the 80s and you kind of longed for some more balance in the news. And so you're like, finally someone who's sympathetic.
Yeah.
But there should be something a red flag that flies in our mind when the media doesn't have somewhat of an adversarial relationship to politicians because they're there to hold them accountable, right?
Yeah, how can you do that?
Yeah.
If you're friends or buddies.
Yeah.
We're giving you political advice. Sean Hannity showing up at Trump rallies. Okay, how are you going to do this? How are you going to speak objectively about Trump if you're Sean Hannity? All right, and so on January 6th we have the text. They being Hannity, Ingraham, they are frantically texting and calling and begging the president to stop the riot. Their texts are being displayed and being read during the January 6th committee hearings as they were on Thursday night. So I can imagine if you were in the war room at Fox News and you're going, everybody else is showing this, are we going to show it? But they also know that they're going to be kind of dragged through this thing.
Yeah, and so then you have to ask the question, why would they want their pleas to stop the riot to be hidden from the audience? It's a good thing, right? They're trying to get it stopped. They're trying to save lives. Lives are being lost. People are being injured.
It would be a good thing if they said in public the same thing they were saying in private on the text messages, but it's embarrassing to have their text messages revealed because they're not consistent. As it happens, they're lying weasels. Let me not to put too fine a point on it, but I don't often use that kind of, but I'm saying that straight up. I am personally and as a citizen, I am upset and I'm very concerned that you would have people be duplicitous about something so important and so dangerous as that unprecedented, and I hope it'll remain unprecedented as an event, but I'm not sure.
And I say this frequently. I think we both say this frequently. I'm just as disturbed when I see people from the other political side of the aisle do those kind of things, but it's more troubling to me when it's folks who claim to be on our side.
There you go. That's right. And so they went on their programs the next few nights after January 6th to play down what it was they were scared to death of when it was happening in real time. Mm-hmm. They implied it was Antifa dressed as Trump supporters. To this day, many people who heard them say that believe that false claim. They deflected from President Trump's responsibility to Nancy Pelosi. Why wasn't she stopping these people from rioting since she's in charge of the Capitol? But the text put the lie to those false claims and those deflections. They weren't frantically calling on Trump to stop Antifa. Okay, Antifa's going to listen to Trump, right? He's got their ear? I don't think so. They could have gone on air in real time and called on Pelosi to do her job and stop the riot if they really thought it was her problem. No, they knew who the people were, they knew who the people supported and who they would listen to, and that was one man. His name is Donald Trump, and that's who they were frantically begging. But then they went on television and presented something else. The stuff about Antifa and Pelosi and then other stories that have floated and started floating early on, this was an FBI false flag operation. These were all made up after the fact to soften what the president had, at the very least, allowed, if he had not, in fact, incited it. Now, I say allowed because everyone knew he could stop it. That's why they were calling on him to stop it, and he chose not to. The over 3 hours that he let it go on. So let me just stop here. I'm talking about what he failed to do while the riot was going on. At this point, I'm not talking at all about what he did up to that point. The January 6th committee is making the claim, and they're going to need to prove this, that they can show that he was involved in making it happen. Now, that's a big claim, so we'll see if they can make good on that. I don't know the answer to that. I'm not making that claim. The only claim I'm making right now is he, like all the rest of us, saw it happening. But he, unlike all the rest of us, could have stopped it, and he didn't.
Well, and many people were saying things publicly about it. He was kind of silent.
Oh yeah,
for that whole time, and that's a rarity, actually.
Well, and he had people. We have the texts. Not only was Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity writing to him frantically, he had tons of people writing to him, writing to his chief of staff, people within his orbit right there in the White House, including, we're told, by the January 6th committee, his own daughter, Ivanka, going to him saying, you've got to go out and stop this thing, okay? So, he made a few kind of innocuous statements that weren't just, look, this cannot happen, leave immediately, none of that. For over 3 hours, he let it go on before a finally more clear call to stop. And that alone, that's fact, and it's damning. It was a dereliction of duty for a president, and he was impeached for it. But politically, Republican politicians and their companion, again in quotes, news sources fell into line with what their constituents wanted, and many still want to hear, that it was not a big deal. People have said that, if you look at this, it was like people taking a tour of the Capitol. Can you believe?
Yeah.
The only way you can say something like that and believe that people would buy it is if you think the only thing they're watching is a channel that actually doesn't show what happened. Mm-hmm. Now I can say whatever I want about it, and people are just taking my word for it because they're not actually watching what happened. There's no way that you can watch what happened on January 6th. And how does the word tourism come out of your mouth? Or that it was a false flag, or that the committee is a witch hunt that's looking into it for this past year. This week, in explaining why they're not covering it on Fox News, Laura Ingraham said the quiet part out loud when she said, we give our viewers what they want. In fact, she used the word, we cater to our viewers. So you just might be a Fox viewer. Remember Foxworthy joke? You just might be a Fox viewer if you didn't see the hearing on Thursday because they didn't show it. And that's not a good thing. Mm-hmm. And so I say, watch and learn, friends. Even if you'll hear stuff you don't like about people you do like.
Good point. All right, we'll pick up with Durham, Flynn, and Mueller in a minute. But isn't one of the objections that Fox and Friends and viewers of Fox and Friends claim that January 6th committee is not legitimate?
Yeah, of course. It's the same playbook that Trump and his people have used for 7 years whenever he's investigated. It's political. It's a witch hunt. 3 things about that claim. One, unfortunately, it's very, very successful when they do that. It's just been amazingly successful. People who follow Trump and his supporters in the news business often just reflexively respond to any questioning of Trump's behavior as a politically motivated witch hunt. He started it with the Russia investigation. His supporters in Congress and on TV picked it up, and many came to believe it. But the idea of a witch hunt is that you're looking for something that isn't there, so that whatever claim that you make to having found something is itself made up. It's a hoax. Mm-hmm. Well, if Mueller was on a witch hunt with the Russia thing, then he was hanging out in covens. I mean, really, in America and in Russia. Because last week we gave the stats on how many so-called witches he was able to find and convict and send to jail. And he would have had, in fact, many more.
And as we pointed out last week, there are other investigations that are not called witch hunts that we've talked about that are not turning up much.
We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute with Durham. Exactly right. That one apparently is not a witch hunt, but it's also not turning up any witches, or not many so far. Right. Now Mueller would have actually found many more witches and warlocks had President Trump not obstructed justice, which Mueller details in Volume 2 of his excellent and extensive report, which if you're interested and you're making claims about these things, then take the time to read it. But if you only listen to Fox and its ilk, you have no way to know any of that.
Okay, well, we encourage you, listen, watch if you haven't already watched last week's episode, because we talked at great length about a lot of this, about this discernment and how it relates to Durham, Flynn, Mueller, and the backstory there. So let's briefly then describe them in reverse order, and then make some suggestions about how we can be better consumers of news.
Sounds like a good way to go. So Mueller issued just under 500 pages in the spring of 2019, detailing the Russian government's interest in helping Donald Trump get elected, in part by hurting Hillary Clinton, and also the extensive contacts he documented that the Trump campaign had with multiple Russians during that period, during the campaign, and attempts by the president to obstruct Mueller's probe. He did not prove the definition of conspiracy, the legal definition of conspiracy or coordination. That's a very high bar. But with the obstruction, we'll never know whether he could have gotten there. Now, all of that is proven. What I just said, every bit of it is proven. Now, this is my own conclusion, that had President Trump not interfered in the investigation, Mueller would, in fact, have even met that high bar of coordination, of conspiracy, collusion. But I admit that I can't prove that. It's only proven that the president did, in fact, interfere in many ways and frantically. And it's my view that was because he was afraid of what more would be discovered.
Yeah, that's an example of clearly distinguishing between proof and opinion that you're talking about. Right. So we definitely need more of that.
Yeah, we don't claim something to be absolutely true that you've not been able to prove. We should all have the humility to be able to admit when we're just thinking something to be the case, give the basis I'm giving the basis for why I believe it to be the case, but then just say, but I can't prove it. Now, we explained last week who Flynn is. He's become a folk hero in some sectors of the right because of the false narrative that's gone around that he was set up to lie to the FBI, that he never should have been prosecuted, and so he's an example of the deep state, that is these nefarious actors, especially in the intelligence community, like the FBI and the CIA, and they're wanting to go after Trump and his people. And that was a claim also made about the Mueller investigation. The deep state is out to get Trump and his people. Now, those can both be proven to be demonstrably false, that the Mueller thing was a deep state operation, that the Flynn thing was a deep state operation. So follow me. With Flynn, he pleaded guilty to lying of his own volition under oath in court twice. Okay, we have the documentation for that. Nobody can make that up. So unless he's feeble of mind, and no one has made that case, he knew exactly what he was doing, and he lied for the same reason that all people do. He had something to hide. We're going to talk about Durham here in a minute, but Durham spectacularly failed within the last 2 weeks to get a conviction of a guy that he accused of lying. The truth is, but that doesn't mean the guy didn't lie. Mm-hmm. It means he couldn't prove that his lying was illegal, because lying in itself is not illegal. Mm-hmm. It's lying to the FBI, mm-hmm. it's lying to authorities, it's lying about a material, is something that's material. Mm-hmm. I mean, if I'm talking to the FBI and I lie about my educational background, but it has nothing to do with what they're investigating me about, mm-hmm. then it's not material to the case. And so you're not going to be charged for that. So it has to be material, and it has to be a lie to a legal official, somebody, an investigator. And so we lie when we want to hide something, or if we want to hide the fact that I don't have this education, and so I lie about it, So that's what Flynn did. He lied because he had something to hide. The Sussman fellow that Durham was looking into, he lied, in my view, as well, because he wanted to hide the fact that he was a Hillary Clinton supporter. But that's not the same thing as proving that what he was trying to do is what started the whole Russia, mm-hmm. so-called hoax and mm-hmm. all of that. And Durham just so far hasn't been able to prove any of that sort of thing. But Trump was able to get now, with Flynn, he was able to get his Justice Department, led by, remember, he had an attorney general named Bill Barr, and he had fired his first attorney general, Jeff Sessions, because he didn't like how he handled the Mueller investigation, so he gets Bill Barr. Bill Barr is now his guy, and he gets the Justice Department, which is headed by the attorney general, in this case at that time, Bill Barr, to pursue the deep state theory. Mm-hmm. So much so that Barr and the Department of Justice tried to and successfully withdrew the prosecution of Michael Flynn. Now, just follow this now. It's the Justice Department that Bill Barr heads that's prosecuting Michael Flynn. Then it's the Justice Department under a new attorney general who decides we don't want to prosecute him anymore. But meanwhile, he has twice under oath pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI already. He also became a cooperating witness with Mueller, but then decided to become an uncooperating witness once he found out that he had an opportunity to go a different route. Mm-hmm. So here's Bill Barr, in effect, to the rescue. The judge in that case is having like whiplash with all of this. The guy's name's Emmett Sullivan. He's the guy who heard Flynn's guilty pleas. And he had never seen anything approaching what's going on here for the government to prosecute, get a guilty plea, and then say we no longer want to bring the case. And he resisted, the judge did, in effect saying, hey, you can't do this. He's making a mockery of the court. What are you doing here? And he went after William Barr by name. But ultimately, he could not sentence Flynn to a case that the government no longer wanted to bring. It dragged out until Trump, past November of 2020, after Trump had lost the election, but of course for 2 more months he's still president, right? Mm-hmm. So, and by the way, did you notice I say he lost the election? Okay, I just want to make sure we're all clear on that. And so Trump pardoned Flynn as a lame duck, and the case was closed. All right, so that's Mueller, that's Flynn. Durham is a guy who many, many right-wingers have placed their hope in to uncover this deep state theory that the Russia stuff was all about getting Trump and his people, and the FBI was in on it, and the CIA was in on it, and the Hillary people were in on it. We're going to see that the Hillary people, in some respects, were in on it, but we'll see why in a minute. So again, Bill Barr plays a major role in this. Now, December of 2019, at the Department of Justice, every department within the executive branch of the federal government, so the Department of the Treasury, Department of Defense, Department of the Interior, every department they have, has something called an inspector general. Mm-hmm. And I think the inspector general law is a fantastic thing because it's designed to hold government accountable. And the idea is that any whistleblower who sees something going wrong in any of those departments has somewhere to go, mm-hmm. and a process for this to be investigated supposed to be without retaliation. Now, just as an aside on this, do you remember the whole Ukraine? We got Ukraine in the news now because they're at war with Russia and we're trying to help them. But remember they were in the news a couple of years ago, mm-hmm. because President Trump made this phone call to the Ukrainian president, and he said, hey, I want you to do us a favor. And announce that you're doing an investigation into Joe Biden, his upcoming opponent in the election. And that's in the context of us giving you these Javelin missiles. Mm-hmm. I want you to do us, that's a quote, I want you to do us a favor, though. Mm-hmm. And so he got impeached for using his position for his political well-being. Yeah. That's what that was about. Now, I bring it up because the Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security did an investigation into that because somebody who heard that was on that phone call, mm-hmm. complained. They said, wait, here's the president, right? So they go to the Inspector General. And the Inspector General does an investigation, and they say, there's probable cause for a case to be brought here. And they refer that to the Department of Justice now. That's how the whole thing got going. Mm-hmm. Now, with the whistleblower law for these inspectors general at these different departments, one of the protections that the whistleblower is supposed to have is their identity doesn't become public. Mm-hmm. But guess what? And so Alexander Vindman, some of you may know that name because, and especially in right-wing media, he became a villain because, of course, he's out to get Trump in this narrative. And so here's the Inspector General in the Department of Justice, a guy named Michael Horowitz. And in December of 2019, he issued a report about what he had been investigating, namely the origin of the FBI's investigation into Russia and the Trump campaign. And his conclusion in a report that you can download on the internet, Michael Horowitz, Inspector General report, Russia, Trump, just Google that, you'll get it. He concluded that contrary to popular lore, it was not started because of the Clinton campaign or the infamous Steele dossier. Some of us have heard about that. Mm-hmm. Named after a guy named Christopher Steele. But in his words, it was, quote, properly predicated. That is, the FBI had good reason to look into these contacts between the Trump campaign and Russia. Barr disagreed. So here he is now. He's the head of the Department of Justice. He's got an Inspector General. The Inspector General does his job, and Barr says, no, I don't agree with that. So he gives to John Durham, a different guy, to look into this to prove that it was not started properly, but rather was started for political purposes. So this is the Department of Justice now trying to prove its own Inspector General wrong. That is what Durham has been charged with. And he's been searching literally across the globe. When I say this, he and Barr have gone together over to places like Italy. They've gone around the world trying to find people who are part of this grand conspiracy. And he's been doing this for over 3 years. And he's indicted exactly one guy, a guy named Kevin Kleinschmidt, who I nor pretty much anybody else other than Mrs. Kleinschmidt, if there is a Mrs. Kleinschmidt, has ever heard of. A low-level lawyer in the Department of Justice who, in fact, falsified an email and brought it to the court, which is a crime. And so he should be charged, and he was found guilty, and he was punished. But that guy was actually discovered by, guess who? The Inspector General, Horowitz. That was turned over to Durham to prosecute. Last week, Durham, or within the last 2 weeks, he suffered that spectacular loss in court with his biggest fish so far, who was found not guilty. A guy that he hoped to show lied to the FBI about what he was doing because he was in cahoots with the Clinton campaign. Now, this guy had turned over some information to the FBI about, remember this we talked about back in February when the guy was indicted, that we talked about there being these DNS, domain name servers, things, and there were these pings.
I got excited when we started talking about the technology part of it,
There were these pings with a place called Alpha Bank
Yeah.
and the Trump headquarters, and it was just weird. There's all this pinging going on. Well, Alpha Bank is a Russia-connected bank. And so this guy got a hold of that. He got a hold of it through a technology guy that he knew, who said, hey, we got this weird stuff going on. You know people at the FBI, don't you? Give this to the FBI because it's weird. So he took it to the FBI. But he said when he took it to the FBI, hey, I'm not working for anybody. I'm not working for any client. And that's what Durham went after him on. He said, no, you have been a lawyer for the Clinton campaign. You are a Clinton campaign supporter. You lied about not being he was found not guilty of that.
Because he was saying that I'm turning this over on behalf of a client.
I'm not doing it on behalf of a client. That's
Right.
what he was saying.
Gotcha.
And they couldn't prove otherwise.
Gotcha.
Now, was he? I don't know. Might have been. Did he want to see Clinton helped and Trump hurt? Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. But that only means it was political, but not illegal. That kind of thing happens all the time. I have no doubt that he wanted to make Trump look bad by what he passed on to the FBI in September of 2016. Then it was leaked to the press, and that's called politics, not a crime, and the jury saw that. Okay. Now, Durham has another trial set for October to prove this deep state connection of the Russia investigation, because he's prosecuting the guy who gave Christopher Steele his information for that dossier. Now, that guy, too, is a Clinton supporter, and I have no doubt that he also wanted to have the FBI look into things regarding Trump, leak them to the press, as the dossier was ultimately leaked to the press, to hurt Trump. Let me just stop here for a second. It was ultimately leaked to the press, this dossier, but not until Trump had already been elected.
That's an important detail.
It is, indeed. But still, it's politics. He may have even lied to cover up his connection to Hillary, but it's not clearly illegal. We'll see. We'll see if he's able to show that. But if it is shown that he lied, then I hope he's found guilty and I hope he's punished, like Michael Flynn should have been punished. I'm amazed at how people, if it's my tribe, then it's okay for them to get off, but other people simply can't get off for these things. How about this? How about nobody gets off? How about if you're guilty, nobody gets off? I don't care whether you're helping Hillary. I don't care if you're helping Trump.
So pretend nobody's above the law?
Let's approve that justice is blind, even has a blindfold on,
That'd be great.
How about that,
That'd be
right?
Great.
And instead of calling it what they did when it was Flynn, I can't believe this. I had friends of mine who were saying, that lying to the FBI is a process crime. A process crime. I had never even heard the term before. And so now I never cease to take advantage of the opportunity to say, all the stuff Durham's looking into is just process crimes. You know that, right?
And you don't really believe it. You're just saying, you're just pointing out that some people who've said that don't believe it either.
That's right.
Yeah. So if Durham does get a conviction with this trial that starts in October, then will that prove that the Russia investigation was a Clinton fabrication or a deep state conspiracy to get Trump?
Well, that's the thing. Even if the trial last week that the guy had been, even if that one where he was found not guilty, if he had been found guilty of lying to the FBI, and even if this guy in October is, it still proves nothing of the kind. And here's for the reason. It's for a very simple, and here's what's important, a very verifiable reason for anybody who wants to look into it, that will show that this whole Durham thing, at least so far, has been a fool's errand, honestly. And here's what it is. The FBI began investigating the Trump campaign before what the guy last week did. When he went and took that information about the DNS, pings and all of that, unbeknownst to him, the FBI had already been looking into Trump and Russia for months. They didn't start an investigation into Trump because of what that guy did. Likewise, with regard to the dossier, this guy who's going to be tried in October, even if that guy is found guilty of lying to them about what he was doing, The Trump-Russia investigation was not started contrary to what many people have been told and think, because they just hear all this information and it's all kind of thrown together and it's not carefully distinguished. And so they think it started because of this false dossier that went around. Mm-hmm. It started in July of 2016, before either of the things that Durham's looking at had ever occurred. So honestly, I don't even know why Durham's looking at them. If he's trying to pursue his charge, which is to show that this was started, the thing was started for political reasons. Not that there wasn't any politics involved. There weren't political people involved, or political people who wanted to see, Trump, get hammered in the press and all of that. It started for political reasons, but he's not looking at the start of it. Huh. It started in the first half of 2016, when the campaign's going on. Now get this, there's an Australian diplomat, a guy named Andrew Downer, who nobody knows or really cares about other than this story. And he's at a bar in London, I think it was, with a guy named George Papadopoulos. George Papadopoulos, the only reason we know his name, he was a young guy that Trump picked to be part of his foreign policy advisory team during the campaign. Papadopoulos didn't have a whole lot of foreign policy experience or any of that, but that aside, he was foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign. And he's in London. And he's talking to this Australian diplomat, and maybe he was drunk, I don't know, but he says to the guy, he says, the Russians have dirt on Hillary Clinton. Huh. The Russians have stolen dirt on Hillary Clinton. And this Australian diplomat's going, that doesn't sound right. Why are the Russians getting involved in a U.S. election? Uh-huh. He contacted the FBI. Oh. Crossfire Hurricane, which is what the investigation into Trump and Russia is called, did not start with a dossier. It did not start with the stuff that this Michael Sussman guy was found not guilty of, with the DNS servers. It didn't start with any of that. It started with this Australian diplomat calling the FBI and saying, and so then they started interviewing. They interviewed this George Papadopoulos, and Papadopoulos lied about it. And so they prosecuted him. And one after another, they start now interviewing people, and everybody's lying. So why is everybody lying? Well, there was a lot more going on.
Hang on, I get this straight. It's just a process crime in this case.
Well, that's
is
true.
That right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So
I'm being facetious, of course, but it is hard to keep straight if you don't want to apply the rules consistently.
Correct.
You got to figure out, all right, when do I?
Yeah. When do I really care about this?
Yeah. So wasn't there that couple in the FBI we talked about, Strzok and Page, who were having an affair?
They were.
And their text messages showed how much they hated Trump and they wanted to see him taken down.
That's good that you brought that up, because I'm sure some of our listeners, if they're still awake after all that, they're thinking, okay, well, what did Brown...
We need a little bell to ring when we get
do.
to
What about Strzok and Page? Because that, oh my goodness, you talk about that. That just had hours and hours and weeks on right-wing media especially. And it was, these people were something else, okay? They're FBI agents, and they're two FBI agents that have an affair, and, that's all embarrassing for them, because at least one of them, Strzok, was married. And so that all came out. And then the fact that they despised Trump was clear in those texts. So they did hate him, and they did not want to see him elected. But there's been no proof that they did anything to keep it from happening.
Okay.
And if they did, they were pretty inept, because he actually did get elected, didn't he?
There's that.
But it's easily proved that even Strzok and Page were not willing to do something outside their bounds to keep Trump from being elected. It can be easily shown.
So you're saying easily?
Easily,
really easily?
Okay, easily. All right, here's how.
All right.
Peter Strzok, and he was in the upper echelons of the FBI. He knew that this Crossfire Hurricane investigation was going on starting in July of 2016. But only they knew it. The Clinton campaign didn't know about it. They did not know that the FBI had this investigation going on. The press did not know. The public learned about the fact that the FBI had been investigating the Trump campaign and Russia and their connections. We didn't learn about that till March of 2017. Guess who was president in March 2017? Trump already got elected. Now, just think about that. If the deep state, the FBI, wanted to take Trump down, including Peter Strzok, and they were willing to do whatever it took to keep that guy from being elected, all they had to do was leak the existence of this investigation. The FBI is looking. I mean, remember, he won by a whisker. He won Michigan by 11,000 votes. He won 3 states to win the Electoral College by a total of 77,000 votes. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. He won barely. Nobody expected him to win, if you remember. It was a shock.
Right, yeah.
So it wouldn't have taken much at all to tip that election. And Strzok could have done that if he wanted to take him down. Several people could have done that, and none of them did that. In fact, the FBI not only didn't hurt Donald Trump by leaking the fact that he was being investigated, his campaign was being investigated, they did hurt Hillary.
Yeah.
If you remember, it's going back a ways, but 2 weeks before the election in 2016, they reopened an investigation into her and her emails. And many people believe that hurt her just enough to keep her from being the president.
Yeah. And you talk about those close votes. It's not difficult to
Didn't
imagine.
take much, right?
So many people are being misled by the news sources they choose. On things like Mueller and Flynn and Durham. And we believe, we're talking about this today because we believe folks' spiritual growth could be helped by being more discerning on where they go for information. So what are some better ways to do this?
Friends, if you're listening right now and your blood pressure is going up because you're going, no, wait a minute, what? No, I know that I don't believe what Brown's saying here. Well, I'm just telling you things that can be verified, okay, documented, and do with as you will with that. But I hope that you'll just take a deep breath, really, and just be willing to entertain the idea that you've been lied to. You've been lied to over and over and over for people who monetize the lying. They get an audience. They get a devoted audience. They've got you. You tune into them and them alone. And they know that. So I don't have to show you what happened on January 6th and how we were involved in it. And I know you're not going to watch it because you only watch us. They've got a monopoly on your mind. Think about that.
Scary.
It is. It's scary to think about. And we Christians, we don't let anybody capture our minds. We capture thoughts. We take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, 2 Corinthians 10:5. So stop listening to the sources who are doing that. That's the first thing. These sources know what they're doing, and they intentionally seek to flood you with false narratives to confuse and scare. Steve Bannon, some of you remember that name. He was a senior advisor to the president until he just the president fired him, but then they became friends again. That's such a sordid tale that Bannon gets indicted and gets also pardoned by Trump at the end of the Trump presidency. It's crazy. This Steve Bannon guy's scary. He's a scary dude, I'm telling you. But anyway, that's for another program sometime. But he called it flooding the zone. When we put information out there, he said, he calls it, this is a quote, flooding the zone with, and I won't say the word, but the Latin word is effluvia. Okay.
Everybody's pressing pause. Google.
Flood the zone with, you got people who know what they're doing. Flood the zone with all kinds of just stuff.
And if they're counting on you being gullible and just
not
listening,
going to look
not
at the sources.
verifying.
Don't verify. I encourage you to go to our website and listen to our 2-week series called The Wisdom Pyramid, based on a book by that name. And in those lessons, I mention misleading sources, but I also offer some that I recommend. So let me just quickly give some suggestions. Diversify your exposure to media. So let me give you some headlines here. Here's a headline from within the last year. Andrew Cuomo is unfit for office. Now, he was the governor of New York, you may remember. If there was any doubt about Mr. Cuomo's fitness to continue in office, it was removed with the details of his treatment of women and the toxic culture of the governor's executive chamber that enabled the harassment to occur. Here's another headline. You should resign, Governor Cuomo. Regardless of what may happen in a court of law, the governor has only one conscionable option left. He should resign. Here is another headline on a different issue. The CDC, Centers for Disease Control's eviction moratorium is almost certainly illegal. Now, eviction moratorium. We, the CDC, are saying to landlords, you can't evict people who aren't paying their rent because of COVID. And this headline is saying that's almost certainly illegal. And then the article goes on to say, if the Trump administration had ignored a direct warning from the Supreme Court, then Democrats would rightfully line up to condemn the president. Mr. Biden does not get a pass on the rule of law. Now, here, I read all of those. They're all from the Washington Post and the New York Times. Okay? And I'm just doing that to say, some of you have been told you can't read a line from either of those sources because they're all lies. And yet you agree with everything that was just said there. And who cares whether you agree with it? What matters is it true? But you cut yourself off from some good reporting when you stay in your silo, friends. So diversify. Even be willing to read the other side from every now and then. Now, most of us are listening to this, and the two of us certainly are conservatives, so I'll recommend some conservative sources, but also some that give a wider perspective. And do what you have time for and you can afford, since some of these require a subscription. But to expose yourself to the other side, you got the Washington Post and New York Times. Some more neutral sources are, and this is free online, Politico, Real Clear. There's Real Clear Politics, Real Clear Religion, Real Clear Science. There's a thing called 1440. It's called 1440 because that was the year that Gutenberg invented the printing press. And so it's www.join1440.com. And what that does, it's free, and it gives you a digest of just here's the stuff that's important, here's the news, okay? Kind of neutral. If you want rightward leaning, the Wall Street Journal is like that. But if you want more conservative, kind of straight up conservative perspective on things, the National Review.
Can I highlight too, because it's easy. We're talking about trying to seek objectivity, and then yet we're comfortable recommending a right-leaning source.
Yeah.
It's because we understand that the idea of true absolute objectivity or impartiality is very difficult to come by. We all begin with a worldview. Even a reporter begins with a worldview. But it's one thing to say, okay, I understand I have my viewpoints that I bring to my reporting. And it's another thing to say, I'm going to exploit people who come from this perspective, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to keep their views.
That's a good point,
So we understand that there's no such thing as absolute neutrality.
Yeah.
But what we're saying is prefer news sources that try to seek objectivity in the reporting.
One, and then if they are catering to a particular audience, like National Review is, like the Dispatch is, if you're doing that, say so.
Right.
Just say that's what we're doing. This is bringing a conservative view to the legal realm, to the political realm, to economics, to that kind of thing. But you're saying that. But still, you're dealing with facts, and you only state things that are provable. And for the most part, National Review and the Dispatch do that. I recommend both of them. So these are all things that you read. Now, if you must listen to stuff, because I recommend being a reader, that's a discipline of the mind. But if you must just only listen to stuff, which is the case, if you're gonna choose between CBS, ABC, NBC, NBC's anchor for the evening news is Lester Holt, and he's kind of a straight up guy in my view. So if you're gonna do that and you want to watch someone, I'd say that. PBS, Public Broadcasting System, they have their news hour every evening, and they go for an hour. But what's interesting about them is they give the headlines for about 15 minutes, and then for 45 minutes, they have these segments where they devote 10 to 15 minutes to a particular subject, interview people, that kind of thing. And that's something you don't get in the half hour or even hour ABC, CBS. You get those interviews. It's a little more in-depth. And then, the best of all, if you're going to watch something, of course, is C-SPAN, because that is completely neutral.
That will really cure people of being addicted to politics, I think. That's the cure right there.
Okay, that's all I got.
Well, very good examples. And ultimately, like we said, this ties into the reason this is important, and two pastors sit here talking about, is because we claim to be people who submit to the truth. We have God's word, and we are people who are given a mission to give a message. And that message depends on our credibility. So we want to make sure we're people of truth, and we're willing to look for it, be committed to it, even when it doesn't make our side politically look good.
Yes.
So hope you find this helpful. We cover these topics and try to produce one of these every week and release them on Saturdays at 2. If you don't already subscribe to our YouTube channel, you should consider doing that. Hit the notification bell so you know when our new episodes come out, and we'll see you in the next one. If you have a question you'd like us to consider, you can send that in to our email address, info@cbctrenton.com, or text it to us at 97000.